TopMedTalk. Monty Mythen here. As we prepare to move into the next phase of the COVID crisis, we're going to be widening our focus here on TopMedTalk. We will continue to deliver COVID-specific programs, but we all have a huge additional responsibility as we try to reboot normal services. So although this piece is not directly related to COVID-19, we believe it's information that is crucial to the bigger task of rebuilding the healthcare system as we learn to adapt and live with this new virus. Thank you to our sponsors and to you, our listeners, for helping us to share this important information.
Well, welcome to TopMedTalk. I'm Desiree Chappell, and we are coming to you from the 5th Collaborative Clinical Trials in Anaesthesiology meeting here in Prato, Italy. Now, I'm joined by Editor-in-Chief, Monty Mythen. Monty, I usually ask you to give a little descriptor of this particular meeting and where we are, but we're fortunate enough to sit down with the organizer of the meeting. We have, folks, the real Paul Myles in our presence right now. At least that's how he's known on social media. From Monash University. Hello, Paul. We just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk to you about the meeting, kind of the history of it, because it's something I would think is pretty unique. I know my experience is my first time here, and it's this amazing think tank of these people globally that get together and describe the clinical trials that are going on. And I just kind of wanted to have more information about the background of the meeting.
Well, there's probably three main reasons why the meeting exists. The first one is the one you mentioned at the start, and that is it's actually located here in Prato, Italy. So any meeting in Italy has got to be good. The first, this is our 5th collaborative trials meeting. We now run it every 2 years. When I started about 8 years ago, I was actually doing a sabbatical in the hills outside Florence, and I was aware of the fact that our university, Monash University, had an academic centre, which is really like a European base for our university, for teaching, for business meetings, research meetings and so on. And at the time I was doing our Atticus trial, a big randomised trial looking at aspirin tranexamic acid in coronary artery surgery. And we were already working with a number of UK sites and a couple of others in Europe. And given I was here on sabbatical, I thought it would be very convenient for everybody to meet in a single location, literally 15 minutes from where I was enjoying the views of Tuscany. So we had the first meeting, and the moment I walked in the door, I just completely fell in love with the venue. It's a beautiful, old, very large building complex, I guess, in the middle of Prato, which is a very small town, 20 minutes out of Florence. I say to people it's a little mini Florence without any tourists. It's quiet, it's unique, it's got beautiful bars and restaurants. And then we ran this sort of 2-day meeting. It worked incredibly well. The staff here at the University Centre are fantastic. And as soon as I went back to Australia, I said to my ICU colleagues, we have to run a joint meeting here next year. It's so important. That was all planned and organised. So the big ICU group, the ANZICS Clinical Trials Group, and our ANZCA Clinical Trials Network ran a joint combined meeting over 5 days the following year. We got immensely fantastic feedback, a lot of researchers from around the world, and it's built from there, so much so that we now have to run a separate meeting. There's too much popularity, so we've had to have an amicable divorce from the ANZICS CTG. They ran their meeting last week. We're running ours over 3.5 days this week, and the feedback's fantastic. We discuss all the upcoming trials, the recently published trials, the trials in planning, and join in with all the collaborative trials groups in anaesthesiology around the world.
This meeting is an invitation only, correct?
That's probably fair to say that. I hesitate to answer that. It's, it is not meant to be elitist. It's really a focused meeting for people who are actively involved in clinical trials, particularly randomised trials. But we are very keen to support emerging researchers. We're certainly keen to include potential leaders or site leads of any hospital, pretty well anywhere in the world, even those who haven't done research before. Our only limitation really is around the fact that we are capped at about 120 attendees.
I should have prefaced that. The venue is beautiful and very intimate, so you actually have to do cap it, I would assume. One thing that I've noticed, and I don't know if you started out this way, is that that you do include, a lot of the big trialists, that things that are either recently published or going to be coming out soon, but also things that are in progress. Now, that's something that you started out with that endeavor, or is that just something that's progressed over time?
I think most people involved in particularly multi-centre studies of any sort, there's a long lead time to get them ideally and optimally planned, getting engagement, getting funding, going through the whole ethics and governance processes and so on. So these are always biggish undertakings. So we need a process where we prioritise which projects we should be doing or which ones we should collaborating with other countries or other sites, where we can get the funding from, have we designed it in an ideal way, or what things need to be sort of stay flexible to work in another country, for instance, where some practices might vary. So we use the whole meeting really as a pathway process. So we have studies that are in the ideas or designing stage, others that are ready to go or are ongoing, but they're just looking for other sites or other countries, and obviously the ones that are up well and truly fully established, and they're often there for both promotion and getting feedback about what sort of analyses should be done, or what sort of sub-studies or post-hoc sub-analyses could be done from the data set, or for instance, data sharing to do an individual patient data meta-analysis.
So, Paul, can you describe from the first meeting to today? I mean, we were discussing earlier that the programme is packed, and it's packed full of predominantly very large trials, and if you start to tot up the numbers, we're into tens of thousands of patients randomised. Is that very different to the first meeting?
It very much is. In the first meeting, it was focused around two trials that I and the Anaesthesia Clinical Trials Network were coordinating and running. And it was primarily to foster engagement, particularly, mostly in the UK, but partly other European centres. Now, that was, in some ways, a very one-way process, and I think a bit sort of self-focused, self-interested. I think everybody involved in collaborative research wants it to be open, shared, truly two-way process. So it very quickly became that. And because of that, as I said, we have a lot of people who want to get to the meeting that literally we can't include. We have a lot of trials or studies that people would like to present that we can't fit into the program. So, we are trying to get the very best, or in some cases, the strategic kind of planning around those that might be the bright stars of the future, or the studies that will be really important in the future. And all of these aspects are considered, I hope, in a very fair and egalitarian way.
I think the networking opportunities that you just talked about are amazing. That's, as we've spoken to people, and I've just personally spoken to them, said that they feel so fortunate that they're able to participate in that and have that opportunity. So not to get too deep into the weeds of what actually has been discussed here, because we know that's all embargoed, but what are some of the things that you are most looking forward to for some of the new studies that are coming forward?
Well, I think the studies we can at least highlight that we are being either peer-reviewed or about to be peer-reviewed by the very major journals, and I'm pretty confident they will appear in the literature in the latter half of this year and some into next year. The big trials that are finished enrolment, or in some cases even been already submitted, the study that was done by Donald Buggy from Ireland and Dan Sessler around the role of paravertebral block in breast cancer. That study's completed. The results were presented here, which was very exciting. And that study, as I understand it, is undergoing peer review right now. So that will, I'm sure, appear later in the year. The other one, of course, is the big balanced trial, looking at deep anaesthesia versus light anaesthesia as defined by a low BIS or a high BIS. That's a 6,500 patient trial with a primary endpoint of 1 year mortality. Those study findings were also presented, very exciting. A fascinating sub-study around delirium was presented, and I'm very confident that study will be in a major journal in the second half of 2019. Our group, the Anaesthesia Clinical Trials Network, has just about complete enrolment on what's known as the PADDY trial, looking at low-dose dexamethasone in all types of non-cardiac surgery, the primary endpoint being infection, because we know it clearly reduces nausea and vomiting. Some people use it as an anti-inflammatory and analgesic technique. It's clearly effective to do those things, but of course the concerns around infection. And it's been crucially important for us to do that trial led by Thomas Corcoran. We will have those results fully finished in the latter half of this year, so I imagine the big manuscript will come out perhaps at the end of the year, but otherwise early 2020. So there are 3 teasers. I've got knowledge about a range of others from a range of other groups. The great news really, I think, for the whole specialty of anaesthesiology and perioperative medicine is that a lot of people are now doing big, high-quality international trials that answering questions that will really change practice.
Paul, I've got 2 quick questions for you. One is to comment on ASOS 2, which is the Bruce Bickard trial, which I think you're sort of a lead advisor on that. And the other one is the potentially sticky issue of data sharing.
Let's start with the good news first. So the ASOS 2 studies, which is really led by Bruce Bickard in Cape Town, but with a fantastic group, an immense group of engaged, both not just researchers, but much everyday clinicians, all through pretty well just about every country in Africa. Now, in my view, this is perhaps one of the most important studies ever done, and it's not just anaesthesia, it certainly is perioperative medicine, but it is really global health. And he amazingly has devised a very simple, low-cost, but crucially important intervention of some simple aspects of perioperative or particularly post-operative care that can detect deteriorating patients in all sorts of settings right across the African nations. That, in my view, are very likely to reduce not just complications but mortality. And this, I think, is so important. He's doing that amazingly with very little funding, with a tremendous amount of goodwill. So that is such an important study, and I believe we'll get the full results of that obviously in the next couple of years. So watch this space for that. The more tricky one, which is around data sharing, is that there's a big push by the World Health Organization, certainly the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, all the major journals, in that they are really stating that you need to have a process of sharing data because of the altruism of patients who consent to our studies. In most cases, there's public funding for the studies, and therefore we have an obligation to maximise the value of any research. So data sharing, you can understand, has got great potential and importance, but the sticky part becomes, well, how do you protect patient confidentiality? How do you protect the interests of the researchers who've done all the work? How do you protect against badly analysed data by amateurish or other groups who may not appreciate where and how the data comes from? So there was great discussion at this meeting around some of these aspects. There's a strong view that the principle's really good, but it's working through the solutions. One last,
I said probably there's 2, but there is one last thing I just remembered. We've interviewed you here about the Relief trial on a number of different occasions, and a top 10 podcast. I think it's our most popular podcast, truth be known. Any more results from Relief, or have we wrung everything out of Relief?
Oh, there's lots more for Relief, of course. And I think, like any big, large, pragmatic trial, we did go to great lengths to collect data that we felt would be important to both explain the results, but also get a better sense, almost epidemiology, of patients having major abdominal surgery. So we don't want to waste that opportunity. And already we've done a planned secondary analysis around the potential value or importance of intraoperative oliguria, and in fact early postoperative oliguria that we published a few months back in the British Journal of Anaesthesia. We've in fact submitted a new grant application to our National Health Medical Research Council to actually look at to address the question, look, the patients in the Relief trial clearly had more acute kidney injury in the restrictive fluid group. I mean, is that actually really important? Because the diagnosis of that is based basically largely around a change in creatinine concentration. If you don't do the blood test, the patient may never have known about it. So we really want to know, is there actually permanent kidney damage? Have they lost nephrons and therefore at higher risk of chronic kidney disease and even need for dialysis into the future? So given we've got a randomised data set, we had good patient follow-up out to a year after surgery, we've now gone back to the funding agency and asked them for lots of millions of dollars, as we do, to actually first of all, collect all the creatinine data out to a year after surgery that we hadn't collected in the original trial, and more importantly, to actually follow up all the patients out to 5 to 10 years after the intervention to see what's happened to their kidney function.
It's great. We're going to be on the lookout for that for sure. But it looks like they're maybe starting to pop some bottles of Prosecco out there, so we need to get you to that. Again, just thank you for everything you've contributed to this greater space of perioperative medicine and trials and collaboration and globally. I think that's so important. Thank you for the contribution to TopMedTalk and everything that you've done for us so far. We look forward to talking to you in the future.
TopMedTalk.
Nick Majerison here. Have you got yourself onto edpom.org yet? If not, you might not be aware, EdPom Chicago tickets are free for a limited period only. Go now to edpom.org. Evidence-based perioperative medicine. edpom.org.